We are a year to the 2024 elections, and already some key manifesto promises have emerged, and it's become pretty topical. But then it is ushering us into a season of manifestos. And what we want to do, beginning with a conversation that we had with David Ofosudote, as you know, in that very interesting lecture that he gave post that we did a conversation with the parties, is to begin to talk about these manifestos, because it has become a document that the parties will use to govern us. You know about the free SHS. The MPP is implementing exactly what it proposed, in spite of all the concerns from within its own ranks and elsewhere about tweaking it to make it more effective, to do a needs assessment first before you implement it. They said, no, I mean, that's what our policy said in our manifesto, and that is what the people voted for us based on, and so that's exactly what we're going to implement. So if we don't begin the conversations about the manifestos now, it will be too late when the manifestos are already out to ask them, well, are the manifestos addressing the real needs of the people? But one of the fundamental questions that we need to be exploring, and we'll do that tonight, is how the manifestos fit into the national development agenda. That is a big question. The good thing about what we are beginning to witness is that the parties appear to be choosing and picking some items from the national development agenda while doing their own thing in elsewhere. So the fundamental question I want to ask tonight is, if they find aspects of the National Development Plan good, why don't they adopt the entire development plan then? Okay, don't worry, we'll come to that question pretty shortly. But why do I say that? As you know, the NDPC released this development plan that ends 2057 in 2017. This is a 40-year development plan, a very important document that we've been analyzing over the last few days to try and see, going into 2024, are the parties looking at that document as a base document for their manifestos or not? It has 5 goals, which covers the entire economy. There are a few things in that struck us, and that was interesting. For example, that document talks about a national railway network that will go through all the regions. And remember that this government had a railways ministry. The idea of that ministry was to deliver on this particular objective there, which we found in the NDPC. Well, the jury is not out anymore on that, because that ministry has failed to deliver on that particular objective for which it was set up, to set up railway networks all the way from the north to the south of the country. That hasn't happened for whatever reason, right? But it is in the National Development Plan. Also, the National Development Plan has said using e-justice to enhance justice delivery. Well, this is being implemented to various degrees, right? Various degrees of success. It's not extensive, but we see aspects of this already in our justice delivery. If you speak to the lawyers, the officers of the court, they'll tell you that we can do a bit more in this area, right? So in terms of the vision, we are doing something, but we are not achieving the full scope of this. Then there's intergenerational financing that prevents short-term financing. Wait, what does that mean exactly? Well, we're speaking to the experts. They'll try and break down for us. And then, yes, you see right that point here. Where have you heard that? You heard that from the NDC and its flag bearer, John Dramani Mahama. Create a 24-hour economy. Yes, that is in the Ghana 40-year development plan developed by the NDPC. So yes, the NDC, and they've said it, it's not like they're hiding, like they stole it. They've said it, that this is something that they picked from the 40-year development plan. John Mahama has spoken to it. He says that plan was developed under his tenure. It was in his last manifesto. He's brought it back. For some reason, it is gaining traction now. Why? Very interesting indeed. We'll get into that. But yes, it's part of the plan. It's part of the plan that is already there. They are not reinventing the wheel. They just picked it from the National Development Plan. And then the 5 goals of the plan, which we found very interesting, a few of them that we should talk about. Build and industrialize this country, inclusive and resilient economy. And I like the emphasis on resilient economy. One of our biggest problems in Ghana is that our economy isn't resilient. Any country cough, we will catch the cold. Ukraine coughed, we caught the cold. In fact, there's a fear that as Israel is fighting Hamas so far away and the bombs are dropping, we may start feeling and catching that cold. That tells you our economy isn't resilient. External shocks is always the reason governments give for the failure of this economy, for which reason almost on the average between 4 to 5 years we go back to the IMF. And so that was in the plan, to build a resilient economy and industrialize. And of course, if you look at the one District 1 factory. It was to aid in this industrialization agenda, create an equitable, healthy, prosperous society. Do we have equity in a society? Are we healthy? Are we prosperous? I would say no. So we aren't there yet. If you look at this, build well-planned, safe communities. Well-planned, safe communities, we are so far off that. That is not something that we've achieved yet. Effective, efficient, dynamic institutions. Are institutions undynamic? They aren't efficient. They aren't effective yet. We need to do that. It was way back when we had Obama come into the country and tell us that we don't need strongmen, we need strong institutions. We clapped for him. He flew back. He stopped being president. We are still trying to build this. But that is something that we had envisioned and we put in there in a document. Strengthen Ghana's role in international affairs. Our international affairs position right now is very difficult to quite make sense of where we are in that scheme of things. But that is interesting. Now, if you look at the list of personalities and organizations that they spoke to in drafting this, you will say it's pretty inclusive. But the two main entities that strike me is the MPP and the NDC. So they were consulted. Those two parties that will form a government in 2025 were consulted. So they know what is in there. They put proposals in there. The key question is, the sort of things that they suggested that may have been captured in the manifesto, have they even tried to implement it? Because they've been in government before. We've seen the NDC say they're going to do 24-hour economy, which is part of the NDPC document. What about the NPP? I'll show you pretty shortly that there's aspects of the document that the NPP itself, since 2017, have tried to implement, although they haven't said it's coming from the document, right? So there are very interesting points there, but there's a wide range of people that they spoke to in putting this together. And then you look at the whole concept of the 24-hour economy. This is what the document said, to be more specific. The NDPC suggests building this agile economy. It's multi-shift, 24-hour economy with 6 to 8 hour work days. 6 to 8, right? And that is already a conversation that we were having already. And it's in the document. It responds to rapid changes in the world while creating ample employment opportunities and supporting social development. So this is how they couch it. So the concept, the model, was already defined in the NDPC document. The NDC just had to take it and expand on that. I will try and show you where they are dissimilar in terms of what the NDC is proposing and what the NDPC had said. But to a very large extent, more than 95% of it is what the NDPC had said. And if you look at it in terms of what they actually define it to be in its real minute particularities, it talks about a one-shift system limiting job creation that we currently have. The status quo isn't good enough, where I come to work at a certain time, I close at a certain time and go and come back the next day. Nobody else takes after me. We work 24 hours, right? So for us as an institution, we're already doing this, where there are people working overtime and all around the clock. But for other aspects of the economy, we are not replicating the shift system that we have here, right? But also because for us, there is a demand for it, because there are people watching us all over the world who won't sleep. They want to tune in to Joy News at 12 midnight, and I want to see something on television. So there must be somebody working at the NCR, for example, who would make sure that you get to watch us at 12. That is a 24-hour economy, so to speak. But then the NDPC proposed that this will also be a 3-shift system, right? That will result in 8-hour shifts. So if you work from, say, coming at 8, you close in the afternoon, there about 8 hours. While we have a 4-shift system, will also result in a 6-hour per shift. So they define this quite well, right, in terms of what this will entail. And then they talk about the sectors that we are looking at. Design and printing, right? So, for example, I take the passport office, for example. We have a backlog. And yet, the passport office printers, they close at a certain time. When you have a backlog, you have to work 24 hours. So that I can go to the passport office anytime and go and get my document. And I know that the printers are working 24 hours, right? And the NDPC had already thought about that. He says one of the areas that will be affected positively by a 24-hour economy is design and printing, right? And ICT, education services, and engineering, all these sectors, they are specified already. And then you have the social wage system. Will also be required, because if people are working in that cycle, you have to be prepared to pay them what they're due. And then you look at, this huge scope of how it will work, what it will take to work. And for me, this is critical. do we have the infrastructure to deliver this? Because the NDPC had already told us what it would take, right? High quality basic education is what you will need for the 24-hour economy to work. High quality health services, efficient public transport system is what you need. And Jemima has said that they will implement some of these to support that whole policy. Affordable housing, dynamic labor markets is very important. Education skills for the 21st century. You need all that for people to work in the 24-hour economy. And again, the NDPC had thought about this already, right? Now, this is how Mahama articulates his own policy when it comes to that. Although, yes, he said it takes on the NDPC document, but he is clear it includes operations with 3-shift system. Remember that I said that in the NDPC document? But tax incentives, I didn't see that in the NDPC document, but Mahama mentions that as a key point for those who will subscribe, because in his case, it is voluntary, right? If you subscribe, you get a tax incentive, right? And that's a very important point for the NDC on this all-important policy of this, which is a flagship, right? Now, if you look at some of the key pointers, they talk about low electricity tariffs will be given after peak hours. So they've talked through this. I'm pretty sure you've seen the document that they've put together to sort of encapsulate this, and they promise that there will be more detailed documentation coming up with a whole policy document that you can use to judge them if they win and how they implement this. But then they'll also have special meters. They'll be employed to provide time use, to sort of gauge, deliver the cheaper power to side businesses during the, this whole system. But then look at him, he talks about 10 a.m. to 6 a.m. Thereabout, that cycle is working all around. Financing support will be provided to strategic agro-processing. So agro-processing will also be something that they are targeting. So that is how he defines his, right? Now, if you look at this current government, they also have their own input in terms of what they want to do. And one of the things we thought we should do is also look at what is in the NDPC document that is very close to what we've seen this government implement. And one of the key things the government had done is digitalization with Dr. Bawumia, who's currently the running mate, who's currently the presidential candidate of the MPP. This is what he had been championing, right? So telecommunications infrastructure was in there in terms of the NDPC's own document, the ICT infrastructure and policy plan in the long-term development plan is anchored on these key issues: ICT facilities, national digital and e-government infrastructure. Do you see any of these resonating with you when you think about the MPP plan? They also have that in there. Geographic information systems, ICT infrastructure, financing was in there. And then you come to the Bawumia policy. In essence, what we're saying is that the NDC have taken the 24-hour economic concept from the NDPC document, right? And then you see this government also implementing an aspect of the NDPC document on digitalization, on the digital economy, if you like, which they've spelled out in many ways what it should look like. And this government is implementing aspects of this already. Whether or not it's by coincidence or by design, we don't know. But it's very similar to what we've seen in the NDPC document. And you see Bawumia sort of spell out what they are doing, formalization of the economy. You see that in the NDPC's own articulation of what this vision should look like, or digitalizing all government services. You see the e-government thing in the NDPC also. So there are similarities, right, in there. And that comes to the question I was asking at the beginning. So if the parties, the two main parties, find interesting bits of the NDPC National Development Plan, let's call it NDPC, the National Development Plan, to implement, why don't they simply adopt that as a basic document in crafting their manifesto? So we have this common vision that does not terminate at the end of 4 or 8 years. That's a key question that we'll ask our guests when they join me. Now, if you look at Dr. Bawumia, for example, and his digitalization agenda and what they say they've achieved, 15.7 million people have been enrolled on the Ghana card, which is important. 10,000 CCTV cameras across the country, implemented the digital addressing system, which you know already. I mean, that in itself is a challenge. We need to reassess its effectiveness, whether people are still using it. I don't use that. I use the Google Maps. But it's something that they've done and implemented, which is part of the broad agenda. And again, you look at the passport applications. We know that that's something that has happened. Very good. I applied recently. It's very smooth, except for the printing. Once that becomes a challenge, 24-hour economy can fix it if you're printing all day round. Intellectual paperless ports. Government has launched the Ghana.gov portal. these are things that, of course, the plan talks about and envisaged must be implemented also. And then, if you look at my good friend, David Ofosu-Dorte's own plan, that all these manifestos that we're talking about must deal with these 30 big ideas, big policy interventions, right? I find that also very interesting because if you look at the National Development Plan, a lot of what he captured in that lecture was in there also, right? And so we are going to be marking the parties, when they came here, marking them against these, but marking them against the National Development Plan also, which really, it's encapsulated in all these very brilliant ideas that David Ofosu-Dorte put up, collective mindset. And by the way, this is so important, and we're going to be delving into that. Did the National Development Plan, for example, talk about this? Because without this, it's very difficult to get people to work 24 hours in shifts. Because trust me, if you haven't done it before, working overnight into the morning is very difficult. But that's what a 24-hour economy will look like. If the mindset says, I only work from morning to evening, 8 to 5, and I close, that will be difficult to implement, right? So we have to fix this first. So did the National Development Plan talk about this and how we achieve that? I'll ask that question because that is key. And you see the independence of the Bank of Ghana there. Cutting expenditure is key. You talk about a complete project started by other parties. And this, for me, is key because if you're looking at the National Development Plan, it's a national development plan, not an NDC MPP development plan. You have continuity of projects, right? And that is why that conversation is important to have because we are going to enter an election year where the manifestos will become the primary documents for assessing our parties. And so this is a conversation we must have, and we are having, right? And so he mentioned a bit more there, a digital economy. It's something that he talks about too. And we just talked about that. NDPC talks about it. The MPP is implementing part of this. And I'm pretty sure when we see the NDC manifesto, they'll have their own version of this, right? But we can assess all of them. And all that is key to this national agenda. So let's have this conversation. This political party manifestos that the parties are in a process of crafting. How will that deliver on this national development agenda? How does that sit into this? So we don't get into next year. A party wins in 2025, and then we wake up saying, but the document you are implementing is not helping us. As we've said, let's make input, let's reform, let's review. Those are all questions that have come up and words we've used to describe the free SHS. But if we had put it in the National Development Plan and interrogated it, we possibly would have had a far more effective implementation of a fantastic policy, by the way, than we're currently having. So let's have this conversation. My guest will join me after this. And thanks for staying with us here on PM Express. And PM Express is always brought to you by Syntax Tanks. It is strong, it is tough. Our Global Beaters experience greatness in every moment. Also brought to you, of course, by the Ghana AIDS Commission. And I always recommend to use Syntax Tanks because they is the first to introduce the double inner layer tank in Ghana. You can now have as many layers as you want. And the Syntax Tanks is first to introduce the white inner layer tanks in Ghana. And that's now something that we introduce to you in terms of the customer specs order. You can just call them bespoke and it will get it to you, whatever size, color that you want. It gives you the longest warranty of 7 years, which no other tank gives you in Ghana. So whatever your water consumption, size or project or demand, choose Syntax Tanks, and it is nationwide. Call their agents on 0244-335 or 168, 0244-335-168, or shop online at syntaxgh.com. Are you strong, are you tough? Joining me right now is Professor Bafo Ejimendia, a former UN governance advisor, joins us now. Prof, thank you for your time here on PMSS. It's been quite a while. I hope you're well.
I'm very well indeed, and thanks for asking.
Fantastic, fantastic. Also joining me is Dr. Kojo Isiah-Mensah Brampa. He's the Director General of the National Development Planning Commission. I'm delighted that he can join us. He'll join us pretty shortly via Zoom also, so we can ask him about, how they're now trying to get the parties to appreciate what they've done already, so we integrate. But Prof, let me start with you. What's your own assessment of the political party manifestos in terms of delivering on a national agenda instead of a party agenda?
This is a very important and a very complex question because, as you know, our political system has determined certain parameters of the operations of the political parties in terms of seeking to develop the country. The fact is that because of the extreme partisanship that we have in our politics, this has seriously affected our development agenda also. It is true that towards every election, the political parties present a manifesto, and they indicate so many things that they seek to accomplish during their term of office. But we also know that eventually they do not accomplish much. They do some, but they are not able to do as much as they promise. And that has been a major concern of citizens. I think that one of the biggest problems here is that any development agenda you have must be supported with the wealth of the nation. That is to say, the nation's capacity to generate wealth in order to support the agenda for development. Else, you resort to borrowing. And this is exactly what has happened to our country over the decades, the 3 decades that we have been having this republic. If you want to build a road, you want to build a school, you want to build a hospital. In other words, if you want to develop your infrastructure, I don't have the money to support it, you borrow. And as you know, we have borrowed so much, now we become a laughing stock of the Eurobond people and the multilateral and bilateral donors. So I think what we need to be doing, the parties should be doing clearly, is to tell Ghanaians how they want to change the fundamentals of our economy. So far, we have what we can conveniently call a dependent economy, the syndrome of dependency. Just recently, we all saw a list of certain things that are imported in this country.
Yeah, including fig wigs that we spend millions of dollars importing, yes.
Exactly. We're spending millions of dollars to import rice, poultry, you name them. When in fact, these are some of the things we can generate, we can produce locally. So I think we should shift attention a little bit more on our capacity or to develop our capacity to generate local wealth. So wealth creation should be critical.
But Prof, what you say sounds simple enough. Why do you think that the parties haven't addressed that? Or they propose policies that is designed at conception to address it, but when they get into power, there's a mismatch between what they propose. That is when the proposal is actually then addressing the fundamentals, between what they propose and what they implement.
Well, you see, again, it comes back to our partisanship in the way we run politics. You see, all the parties, any of the parties seeking power, will want to demonstrate to the populace that, in fact, we can do A, B, C, D, without telling the people how they're going to do it. That's why I started the conversation emphasizing the creation of wealth. Because if your development is going to depend on the charity of the international organization, the multi and the bilaterals, then you're going to have a time when everything will collapse on your face. And this is exactly what you experience. So the point is, we have to be looking at a unified national manifesto. I think your good friend Fosidoti has been addressing that. And I think the document that was produced under the previous government, which I'm sure my good friend Dr. Abraham Powell will be addressing, that is a 45-year development plan that they developed. If there were to be a consensus built on that, and all the political parties look into that as our national development agenda, then, of course, it makes it easier for civil society to monitor. And when you present a manifesto, we will know where it's coming from, you see. So I think the lack of that kind of unison. In fact, people like to refer to many other countries that have developed today. I listened to the very, very exciting lecture by my good friend, Mr. Kwame Piani. I was just driving and I tuned in. There was a live lecture today. And he cited Korea, for instance, many times in his lecture. And you see, Korea became what it was because a leader literally led the country out of its underdevelopment. And that leader was not a Democrat. In fact, he was a military ruler, General Park. And after he ruled for about 24 years and the economy changed, he retired and went to the monastery and sought the remission of his sins because of how he brutalized these people. If you cite Rwanda, that many people today like to cite, some people criticize Rwanda that it's not democratic. And in many ways, maybe not, but it is developing. If you take Malaysia, Mahathir, there for 24 years, you go to look at the political system that exists, the same would test other countries that we like to cite. So the point I'm making is this. There is a close affinity between development and politics. If you want to have true liberal democracy, as most Ghanaians propose, then it's going to be difficult because this competition between the political parties, each trying to do the other by introducing programs that they know they cannot accomplish, but for political reasons they will. And when they come to power, they tend to reverse or ignore previously initiated projects. All these are things that tend to draw us back.
Yeah, and so, Prof, there's something you said. You mentioned three countries. You mentioned Malaysia, you mentioned Rwanda, and then you also mentioned which one other country? Yes, and one common thread runs through all of them. They've had leaders who had longevity. In the case of Rwanda, since 1994. In the case of Malaysia, we talk about 24 years. We don't have that here. It's part of our problem. This four-year cycles, maximum 8 years that we've had since 1992, is a part of the problem. I mean, yes,
it is a big part of the problem, no doubt. You're right. Lee Kuan Yew chased Singapore, I think, in 26 years. Mahathir in Malaysia are roughly 23, 24 years. Park in South Korea was about 18 to 20 years. So that longevity has an important role to play. But let me make a point here, a caveat.
Yeah.
We have seen so many African leaders outliving these other people have cited, and their countries are among the poorest in the world.
Yeah.
And that's a very interesting phenomenon you have to talk about. Because in our own country, if longevity were to be the measurement, then I dare say that Rawlings, who ruled for 19 years, could have changed the country. But it didn't happen. All right? So longevity, yes, but that requires a certain commitment of leadership, selflessness of leaders, certain qualities that make the leader become a shining example, so that even if the leader is, quote unquote, suppressing his people, the generality of the population can see what is going to come to them. But we don't have that, unfortunately, in African countries. So yes, longevity is important, but should come along with certain qualities of leaders. So yes, the 4-year, 8-year, 10-year is part of the problem.
So if it's part of the problem, what do we do? I want to create a separation. There's the tenure problem, and then there's the leadership problem. So you you can extend the tenure as long as you want. If you have the wrong leader, you still have a problem. Fine. So let's separate the leadership one for a second. Let's talk about the tenure. If the 4-year is a problem, what do you do with that?
Well, what you do is to go back to the Constitution, because this is prescribed by the Constitution. And we have to respect the Constitution, meaning that if you want to change, you got to change the constitutional provision for that. And so many people have proposed that. In fact, even I think the last address of the former President Kufuor to the nation, he touched on that the 4-year was inadequate for any president to make any serious indent on the country's progress. So certainly, we have to change. And by the way, there's nothing magical about the tenure that we have imposed on ourselves. We don't have to do what the Americans do. Even Liberia, they have 6-year, 10-year. Okay, so there's nothing magical about it. So we don't have to feel like we cannot change it, because seriously, it's not adequate for any leader to make his mind. But the danger, though, as you rightly pointed out earlier, is that if you are unlucky to have a leader who is inept to be there for the 6 years, then you have a problem. That is why when you make it longer, then there must be other provisions that can address that human weaknesses. In other words, if somebody is proven to be a useless leader, there must be a way constitutionally to deal with that person.
And we'll circle back now to the fundamental point about the manifestos and the National Development Agenda. We've analyzed why it's not happening, but we have a document. We have a document. Going into 2024, we've seen, as I illustrated, NPP is sort of implementing a bit of that. But the NDC has been very categorical that the 24-hour economy, which everybody's talking about, came from that document. So there are really fantastic things in that document. If we agree on that, why aren't the parties just simply coming to some consensus on adopting the document? And how do we get them to not just choose and pick which of the items in that great document they implement, but using the entire document as a guide, as a basis? We'll talk about that when we return. Let's live on PM Express, having a very important conversation about 2024. 2024 is all going to be about the manifestos. As you know, it's become the primary governing document for the parties. It is not a national development plan. Sometimes even not necessarily what's in the constitution or what society says they want. It is what the parties say they want. And that goes into the manifesto, and that is implemented. And as we've been having this conversation for the last 2 weeks, starting with a lecture by my good friend David Ofosu-Dote, we spoke to the parties themselves, and they said, yeah, they like that the 30 points that he put out, but there are challenges there in terms of, well, they were voted into power to prosecute a certain agenda, and if they don't do so within 4 years, they're either gone or, best case scenario, 8 years. Okay, so if that's the case, and now that we're seeing that the parties are finding very interesting bits of the national development plan that we already have, that they are implementing, NDC, 24-hour economy, MPP, digital economy is key. Whether it by coincidence or design, it ties in very nicely with what has been proposed in the 40-year development plan. Okay, so if that's the case, it's very possible, is it not, that if they really look critically at the national development plan, they may find other things in there that they can agree on to implement. So why are we not having that? Instead of all the parties, because of political competition, implementing their own policies that then get abandoned after 8 years? That's the conversation we're having tonight. And I have with me Professor Bafo Jumendria, Dr. Kojo Isiam Mensah Brampa, who is the Director General of the National Development Planning Commission, had agreed to be with us, but we're able to reach him for now. And so, of course, when we get him to join the Zoom, we'll get his thoughts on this matter. Very important indeed, because they are the authors of that primary document. But I want to go back to Professor Bafo Jumendria. Prof, to that question, were you surprised to learn that this 24-hour economy that we've been talking about was actually taking from the NDPC document? And Mr. Mahama himself was saying the last time that, of course, this plan was developed when he was the president. And so they found it useful that this is an important enough policy for them to implement. And then they talked about it, and then everybody's talking about it. So it's good for them. They're riding on that, but it is fundamentally in the National Development Plan developed by NDPC. So it's good. So if that's the case, why are they not using the entire document and choosing and picking? The NPP2 has digital economy, which is also in there.
Yes, the document is an excellent one. And I know the amount of brain power, energy, and other things that my good friend Nimoy Thompson and his staff, I think Dr. Boche was then the chair.
Yes, Professor Kwesi Boche was. Yes.
Professor Boche, yes.
Yes.
They did a fantastic job. In fact, they made some projections, 3D projections showing how this country may look like if we were to follow this plan for the next 45 years. So they did a pretty good job. And I wish we can adopt it as a national development agenda, all parties signing on to it. Okay? Now, in our present situation, it's going to be difficult to achieve that. I wish, again, that as a people, we can come together to say, look, we are declaring what we may call uniting for peace and progress for the next 20 years or 25 years, that we're going to dispose of this extreme partisanship, build a national consensus, and even find a different way of electing our leaders. Look, the thing is, democracy is not a straitjacket. We as a people, if we find that this poisoned partisanship is destroying the country, nothing stops us from revising what we have and choosing a path. Okay? So far as there's agreement, there's consensus among the key stakeholders. Anyway, this is just something I'm throwing in. But the thing is, if we're to have all the parties to sign on to this agenda, this development plan, instead of, like you rightly said, picking and choosing. The fact is, look, if you want to develop this country for the next 50 years, everything that the document says, we'll have to do it.
Yeah.
It will be a matter of how far do you go within this first year. You have money to do this. And so those things we can sort them out. But in terms of the vision behind the document, I think it's a great document. So if the NDC is picking the 24-hour economy, and then the NPP is picking the digitalization,
yeah,
all these are captured there. But why can't they come together to say, look, for the sake of this country, let's put this aside, let's put our partisanship aside, and see how we as a people can unite behind this. And for the next 20 years, this is what drives our development.
But
you see, we have had a few...
Yes, so, Prof, if you leave it to them, they won't do what you're suggesting. So how do we compel them to do that?
That's a good question. Somehow, the way they've created what one may call political machines, they know how to win elections, but they don't know much how to rule. Both parties are proving that. Because each of them has gotten 16 years, isn't it? Almost 16 years each.
Yep.
And still we're at a place where our economy is almost bankrupt. So I'm not convinced that any of them can do it on their own. That's why, for me, it has become urgent for us to get them to understand that the approaches they've adopted on their own will not help us. How you get them to do that? I have to revert to civil society, unfortunately. And I think civil society, if we organize better, we are okay. Ghanaian civil society is one of the most vibrant I've seen. But still, we need to do better. We must make our voices heard. We have to find some strategies to compel these parties to sit around a table. It cannot be as difficult as Palestinians and Israelis sitting around a table. It may not prove as difficult as that. I think, by and large, we know each other, we understand the problems, and both of them have tasted power. 16 years, they didn't do much. So why can't they accept that it's time for us to come together as a people, as a nation, and forge a common front for the sake of developing our economy? Look, this exactly, in the beginning of this conversation, this is exactly what I said. If you are citing South Korea, if you are citing Singapore, you are citing Rwanda, if you are citing Malaysia, that's exactly what they did. They did away with partisan politics. They united with a leader who was committed to the cause, selfless leaders. And I think we can have that person if we are serious in this country.
I mean, Prof, we are currently at the phase before 2024 when the parties are putting together their manifesto committees. At least they're dropping us hints of what will be in the final documents. You talk about civil society. This is the moment to get the parties to sort of build into their manifestos a national agenda, not a party agenda. What specifically do you propose the CSOs do? Very practical solutions, maybe beyond the CSOs, which other agencies you may recommend also that join into this conversation? So that to get the parties, now that they are drafting, putting teams together, to start thinking long term and not 4 years and 8 years.
I think if we can organize a civil society and we are aware of what we need, and I believe we do, then we can make these proposals that if Party A refuses to adopt this, we are going to organize against them at the elections. Let's rebel against the parties. Look, who are the parties? The political parties are our own people, right? They are our own people. And if they are not going to do what the nation needs to move on, then I think we should begin to rebel against the political parties by threatening. And people like me, I wouldn't mind campaigning against a political party that refuses to sign on to such an agenda, which the whole nation supports. Because look, we have done this for 32 years now, getting to 32 for this Fourth Republic. And where are we? Maybe we are worse off than even we started. So I think a time has come. Don't let us begin to play around with I don't know, not with words, but being soft on each other, nyamioho and all kind of stuff. I think we have reached a point where Ghanaians should be more serious, because I think it's enough for the political parties. They've done what they could on their own. They are not succeeding. Look, as we speak, I don't care who wins power in 2024, unless the agenda is clear on the lines that the NDPC has proposed, backed by civil society and all of us. No party is going to save this country. Because when they step in, their first recourse will be to negotiate for more loans and more loans and more loans. Okay? So the issue of changing the fundamentals of the economy, which means reversing the dependency syndrome that we have, making sure that those things that we can produce for ourselves, like rice, in the 70s, didn't we produce and export rice in this country under General Champon? Didn't we? Weren't we producing our tomatoes and onions in the 70s? How can we sit by and almost 40 years later, we're importing tomatoes from Sahelian countries? This is a shame. And I think our leaders should realize this. Okay? So I think it's important for a serious organization of civil society to literally get this party to sign on to a national agenda. Look, these promises, so far I've been following the campaign. I don't know if the campaign has started, but I've been following the pronouncements. I'm going to give you, I'll build you school, I'll build you this. What are you going to build with? What are you going to build with? The exchequer is empty. So you're going to borrow again. Then we compound our economic woes. Is that what they want? So I think we need to begin to look at the fundamentals. If you want to create jobs, we cannot be creating jobs like we did before, where the state created or the government created certain things, youth for youth for police, youth for street cleaning. They went nowhere because these were consumptive creations. We need initiatives that will create wealth for the nation. Without national wealth, you can't do much. So I think we have to be looking at how we can get the parties to come to a common ground for the next X number of years, so that we can all together pursue a common agenda with the checks and balances that deserve to be in place, with civil society being a real referee in these matters, and making sure that the right things are done. If we do not do that, then I'm afraid that we'll be here another 10 years and we'll be talking the same conversation.
I mean, and it's instructive when you look at the consultations that the NDPC did, that they consulted the NDC and the NPP. They specifically mentioned them there.
Yes.
Is that a problem that wasn't in terms of the political groupings, that we restricted ourselves to those two? And I'm leading to a question. Should we be thinking beyond those two parties? Should we now be thinking third force? I know that phrase has been overused because we struggle. Nobody's getting close to even resembling anything like a third force. But isn't that where possibly the solution is?
Of course, right there. You hit it on the head. But you see, it's getting difficult for quote-unquote third forces to come in because the parties have successfully monetized the political process. And they do it shamelessly. Because they come on radio to tell us how much they pass to delegates to get them elected. They already monetize it. So if a third force has to emerge and has to do the same thing, I'm not sure they can compete with them. There's a need, in fact, of Osudote's lecture talking about changing the mindset of people. It's critical. Because right now, the parties have succeeded in indoctrinating citizens about taking money from them and for them getting their support. So election come, everybody is looking for money from politicians, and they're happy to provide that so they can win power. So look, if we don't change the mindset and we don't change the system to make it more difficult for potential leaders to do their work with dignity and integrity, then it's still going to be difficult. So I agree, a third force could come, but I think we need to work harder on that. If we don't, it's going to be difficult. But I think at the bottom of all this, Evans, is to really see how we can change our political system. Even this development we're talking about, I'll tell you, if we don't strategize to decentralize that development process, and we are still keeping everything here in Accra, we're going to go nowhere. If you travel out of Accra to any part of this country, you feel miserable. There's nothing going on anywhere outside Accra. And even Accra is even it's scrambling with bad roads all over the place. But it is pitiable to go out there to see. All because we have centralized the system so much, nothing goes on anywhere without a bureaucrat in Accra authorizing or signing off. So I think the whole notion of decentralization should be central to the discussion on our development. Because look, certainly we cannot have all the districts or the regions to develop at the same pace, but those that have the potential and the means to develop, let them go on. Of course, Ghana is one big country, we can move anywhere and pick up a job. But to put everything here to the extent of overcrowding this city, I think is a bad policy that we've been pursuing. So decentralization should be a critical part of any changes that we want to have in the
Thank you very much, Prof. I'm really grateful that you joined us. This conversation is something we'll be having as we approach 2024. And this is the time to have it. You don't want to wait till the parties are done with their manifestos before we cry that they've left us out and these are the things that aren't going to address the fundamental challenges that we have. More of this in the coming days. Enjoy the rest of the evening.